Hello and welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast by the staff of Threads magazine. I'm Carol Frazier, editor of Threads, and I'm joined by Janine Clegg. Hi, Janine.
Hey.
Today we're joined by Karolyn Kiisel, who's going to be our guest. Karolyn is a Los Angeles-based author, designer, and educator. She has an enviable studio space in downtown Los Angeles where she designs costumes. The space is also available as a workshop resource for costume and fashion designers. Karolyn is the author of Draping, the Complete Course, published in 2013 by Lawrence King. That book has been translated into 10 languages and is considered the authoritative text on the subject. She's also released a second book, Advanced Creative Draping, which covers conceptual, avant-garde, and couture-level draping. Karolyn's fashion collection has been sold at fine retailers internationally. It's appeared on the red carpet and graced the pages of Women's Wear Daily and the cover. Her costume designs have appeared on stage and screen. A graduate of UC Berkeley and a passionate educator, Karolyn currently teaches at the historic Theater Academy of Los Angeles City College. She previously taught at Otis College of Art and Design for 25 years, working with many of America's top designers. Today, we'll talk to Karolyn about her new book on draping and also find out about her career in design and teaching. So welcome, Karolyn. We're so glad to have you here.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, my first question for you, Karolyn, is I know you're launching this new book, Advanced Creative Draping, and you had a big launch party this weekend. How did the party go?
The highlight of the party was that we had a live alpaca visitor.
Wow.
I've been really excited about the final chapter of my book, which is creating heirloom design. So I've been really talking a lot about slow fashion and sustainability. And so it's come out that alpaca fiber is extremely sustainable and eco-conscious for many reasons, which I won't go into right now. So I felt it was appropriate to have a visitor. So that was a lovely addition to the party. And also one of my contributors, Christelle Cochet, loaned us some of her beautiful clothes for some models to wear. And yeah, it was a great celebration. A lot of my contributors were there because the book came about with the help of lots of people. So.
Well, I spent some additional time looking at your book yesterday, and the acknowledgments page is great. It's really fun to read because you don't realize how much goes into a book, except that the book is so beautiful. And I recommend to our listeners that they try to get their hands on a copy because it's really inspiring. It's a beautiful book with really stunning images. And I love how you start out just talking about kind of like what are the principles of design, why you would want to design. There's so much in it for even someone who is not going to professionally be a designer, just to get inspired to think about what you're making, which is in a lot of ways also a start of sustainability. Think consciously about what you're going to make before you launch yourself into it. So it's really it's a really lovely book to just sit and sort of sink into. If you are a creative person at all, I think that it would be very highly recommended.
Well, thank you. I mean, I did start out wanting it to be a book about creative inspiration and how we take our creative inspiration and make something physical out of it. So I start out talking about, creating inspiration boards and trying to think about what it is you want to make. And then of course, the idea that practicing our craft, whether it be sewing, draping, that is another way of getting inspired. So draping itself can be an inspiring practice.
Yeah. Well, can we take one step backwards? I wanted to ask you about your first book, Draping the Complete Course, and what prompted you to write that book? Was it did you need? Yeah, Janine has our office copy. Did you do it because you felt your students needed that as a reference?
Yes, actually, I did. During my years of teaching, I noticed that some students were drawn towards the more left brain and some right brain. So some felt more comfortable pattern drafting by measurement on the table, and others were more comfortable draping. Personally, I was always more attracted to draping because I like to see what I'm shaping as I go. And I also discovered that for students, it was a much easier way for them to develop design, that when you draft something, you have to make the pattern, cut it out, sew it up, put it on the form or yourself or a model and see what you've got. And it's like, oh, hold on, I wanted the skirt to be fuller or the sleeve to be tighter, or, it's not quite what I saw in my mind. But with draping, you get the immediate gratification of seeing what you're getting as you work. So I felt like it was a much more successful method for the students.
So I can completely understand how draping on a form would give you the image of what you want. And that is really amazing. I would say that for a home sewer who grew up with patterns, we don't understand it. We understand everything. It starts out flat and it becomes three-dimensional just based on somebody else's design. So it's exciting to think about being able to just actually sculpt that design yourself. So the next question I have for you is, what's the difference between just draping and advanced creative draping?
Well, the first book, Draping the Complete Course, takes us through the bodice, the skirt, the jacket, the gown, and all of the real basics of draping. And advanced creative draping, I start talking about this skill of visualization and how it's really important as a designer to be able to visualize your finished product. So the first chapter talks about, it's something I call experimental draping, which is, let's see, I have some fabrics here, talking about how studying your fabrics is really important. So here's a piece of silk wool, and you can see it's quite bouncy, and it's the dress that you see in the background. And then how that differs from this very soft two-ply silk crepe. So I have a whole chapter devoted to really just studying textiles and learning the difference between how they drape and also how the muslin drapes. So if you're working on a toile, you need to be able to visualize the difference between your muslin toile and then your final product in silk charmeuse or denim or whatever it is you're working on. So there's 7 different methods that I introduce in advanced creative draping. I talk about improvisational draping, which is kind of draping without a planned outcome, just kind of playing and experimenting. I talk about draping on a half scale form, doing a block to drape method. I talk about draping with embellishments. And then I do 2 chapters in the end where I use all the methods. So it is considered a master's level course in draping, whereas the first book was kind of, when I was at Otis, we did 3 full years of draping, patterning, design. So that would have been accompanied that type of class. But that being said, it is also a book that anyone can pick up and learn from. Everyone should be able to learn experimental draping because it's really fundamental to being a designer, knowing your textiles, knowing how they drape. Draping with embellishments. It's in advanced creative draping, but that's something that certainly even beginning designers do. Let me add a little piece of embroidery or beading, or let me think about doing a print on this fabric. And so the skills that I'm teaching in that chapter certainly would apply to advanced or beginner level, certainly.
When I was looking through, I was thinking, if I had a border print and I didn't know what to do with the border print, an experimental or improvisational draping would be a great way to figure out where you want that border to fall, what direction it should go in. It's a great way to get started. I even
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, even at the beginning where you're talking about, I think it was in the experimental draping chapter, just taking 3 different fabrics and draping them like a slightly gathered around a form, just to see how much space they take up. I don't think a lot of people necessarily think about trying that. You just kind of think, I'll make this skirt out of this. And then you realize, as you say, you haven't visualized it. You're like, I thought I was going to get a ball gown, but what I have is sort of a drapey Delphos goddess kind of wrappy thing that's hanging straight down. It's amazing how your eyes are opened when you just play a little bit with your fabric on the dress form.
Well, do you think when you make a muslin that you should make it with the fabric, the same fabric or similar fabric as the final product, or do you go with the muslin?
I'm a big proponent of muslin. I feel like it's It's the blank slate that we work with. It's our medium. Muslin is a design industry standard. It's easily obtainable. You can draw on it. You can fold it and tear it and crease it and pin it together easily. And also, when let's say you've draped something or you're working on a pattern that you've adjusted and you want to make a toile, when you do it in a muslin, you can really see the shape that you've gotten, and you can see whether your pieces are balanced and do your fitting with that. Whereas if you're working with color and different types of fabrics, you get distracted by that. So I like to be able to observe the subtleties of shape and silhouette. So I feel like muslin is a better, it's one of those things that I think it's worth the time to make a toile out of the muslin. It's easier to fit it. Now, that being said, if you're working with knits, you kind of have to make your toiles out of knit. If you're doing something really heavy like a denim, you also probably need to do your toile out of a canvas, like a canvas muslin, right? So there are different weights of muslin we can work with as well.
So if you're Madeleine Vionnet and you're going to use, or is it Madeleine Vionnet, I think, or Madame, somebody who used a lot of silk, you used a lot of silk jersey, you probably would just drape with that, I think.
Well, and also in the high-end design houses, they drape with the real fabrics because they can afford to. A lot of us can't really afford to be draping in silk charmeuse and then just mark all over it with our chalk and chuck it out and do it again or something. So it's also a cost thing.
Right. And I'm sure for students, they're just trying to, find the most budget way to get going on the design to start with and then move from there. Yeah, exactly. That's actually very interesting. Carolyn, I know you do a lot of teaching and that you are trying to set your students up to have really good studio practices for efficiency, creativity, just keeping things going really well. Do you have tips that our listeners might be able to put into practice at home?
I find myself telling my students constantly to keep their tools and equipment organized. As you all know, sewing takes so many different elements. We've got our machines and our stitch gauges and our needles and threads, and it just takes a lot of elements to pull it together. So you have to stay organized. In my studio, I have a pegboard behind me with my rulers and my scissors and all of my main tools, and I have a table with the pencils and chalk that I use. And so as you work, they naturally get kind of all over the place. So it's really important to keep putting them back into position and keeping your tools organized. And I also wanted to show you this little tool belt that I made for my first book when I was doing a lot of draping. And I have my favorite scissors and my needles and my chalk, razor blade. But it's really important to have the right tools. So your scissors are your most important tool. So take the time and spend the money and get something that really suits your hand, because it's really important. I have the needles that suit me best, that fit my size of hand. So, and I'm always telling my students to clip their threads as they go. I know it's a goofy thing, but it's got to learn it.
Carolyn, how did you decide what size needle was best for you?
At Otis, we worked with an amazing designer, Natalie Shannon, who's in Alabama with her School of Making. And she talked to us about these amazing hand stitchers in rural Alabama and their sewing habits, and how you only make your thread as long as your elbow, and how they would have the same needles for so long that the needles would actually shape to their hand, like bend to their hand. So when we were working with her, I experimented with different sizes of needles, and I just found this 7 sharp was the best one for me. And I work with a lot of silks and thinner fabric, so it's fine. Now, if I'm working with denim or something heavier, obviously I need a bigger needle, but that's kind of my standard.
Is that because you're doing a construction or basting, or what are you doing by hand mostly in your work? All kinds of things?
Right now in my costume design project, I do a lot of the cross stitch, and I'm attaching belts to things, and I'm attaching, we're working with a lot of foundations. So I fit the foundations onto the performers, and then I do the cross stitch and hook the gowns onto them, or the robes, or the. So I use the cross stitch a lot.
Yeah. Oh, so that was what I wanted to ask you. What are you working on right now? What are we seeing? Are we seeing something in your background that's a new project, or what's going on?
I'm working for the third time with an opera composer, Peter Wing Healy, who writes original opera. So I did one 15 years ago, 4 years ago, and now this newest one is called The Tree. And it's about the spirit of an oak tree who falls in love with the young poetic man who reads it under the tree. And so it's like 6 tree spirit costumes, which are really fun. And so the big sort of kimono that you see in the background is the redwood tree sort of coming together. And anyway, so the opening night is Monday. So the opera is in the final stages of
That's
production here at the
exciting.
studio.
Have you been
Yeah.
having lots of fittings? Do the singers come in and have lots of fittings?
Yeah, we try to limit it because sometimes they come in and they get so excited and they love to see their costumes and they stay for hours and we're like, okay, we have to get back to work here. But yeah, we try to limit the fittings to 1 or 2 per performer. We've got, I think, 14 performers, so it's
Wow.
it can be a time-consuming process.
So they're custom fitted to each. Oh, wow. What about
Yeah.
understudies? How does that work?
We just added a sort of an understudy because the main tenor started to lose his voice. So they now brought in a second tenor. So they often do this in opera. So one will sing like a Thursday, Saturday, and the other one will do Friday, Sunday, so they don't strain their voices. So we just had to quickly pull together 6 new costumes for the alternate tenor.
Wow.
Did were you able to get the same fabrics? Did you just have a lot of fabrics around?
Fortunately, this particular character was a lot of contemporary clothes. So we were able to quickly pull this stuff for him rather than having to make things from scratch. So, but yeah, you always have to be ready in costuming for the last minute surprises. It's always something.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
But costuming is really fun. And I did devote a whole chapter of the book to draping for costume design because it is a lot of special techniques that one would only use for sort of custom fittings and I do a whole section on fittings and what is the proper protocol for fittings. And it seems like quite a natural thing to do. Oh, put the garment on, put the toile on and pinch it in. But students, I find, forget that fitting is the moment where you can step back and really look at your garment and decide whether it's really what you want. Maybe go back to your sketch or go back to your original concept and try to just take a breath and look at it from a distance and see if there's any major silhouette issues that you need to change, or is the fabrication right? Are the accessories right? So I have a whole list of fitting protocols that I go through, what kind of materials you need to have on hand and how to make them work properly. So that comes from years of experience of doing it at the schools where I teach, because it's not something that comes, just automatically. There are certain rules to follow.
Oh, that's really interesting. I had not given that any thought, but the fact that you could get in there, do a fitting, and then the person leaves, and then you go afterwards, I forgot to check if, or, whatever. I mean, I can imagine that what you want to do, among other things, is see if the proportions you did in your sketch are reading that the way you want them to on the actual person. But
exactly. Yeah. And that's important in costume design. I actually have a whole chapter devoted to draping from an illustration. So that's a particular draping technique where we are trying to hit the proportion of a sketch and also interpret the sketch. So let's say you're working for a top designer like Lanvin or something, and they've done a really wild, or Lacroix, who used to do wild sort of colorful sketches. And as the person who's draping the design, you have to try to capture the mood, the exuberance or the quiet elegance or whatever the mood is, not just the follow the proportions. And also a lot of times you're working with a sketch where it's quite elongated. Designers will sketch quite elongated illustrations, and suddenly you've got to translate that to a different proportion. So with costume design, a lot of times the sketches are really important because whether it's your own sketch or whether it's a costume design sketch that you're working with, you've got to try to capture that proportion as well as the attitude and the look of the sketch.
I find that interesting in costume and in high fashion. You know, as you say, the sketches tend to be 9 or 10 heads tall, but almost nobody's like that except a small group of runway models.
Right.
How do you? Are there tricks for getting that look if you're trying to, but you're not working with somebody that shape?
Yeah, I mean, I know at a lot of the schools where I teach, they're working on clothes that are for the, like, let's say their senior collection fashion show or something. And so they are working with tall, slender models. And so you can, then we have to adjust our dress forms to be, bring the waist down and raise the form up to the right height and that sort of thing. And then, but for the most part in fashion, we're draping for fit model size, which would be a typical size, a size 8 or a size 6 or whatever the fashion firm fit model size is. So I think with home sewing, obviously you're trying to sew for yourself or for your client. And you've got to then work with a dress form that you can adjust, or you have to adjust it afterwards. In my opinion, it's much easier to work with the dress form before you start. I know I, made clothes for myself for years and would just use one of my dress forms. And then at one point I decided I had an older dress form and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make this my size. So I padded up the waist and the hips and made it short as I am. And it's like, wow, I could suddenly really see, oh, this is actually what it's going to look like. My waist is kind of short and this is my shape. And it made it a lot easier to come up with a good design or a design that was flattering when I had the right shape of dress form.
So you would recommend if a home sewer who wanted to try doing some draping for themselves would get a dress form and try to pad it to size and shape so that it more or less replicates what their body looks like.
Yeah,
and then go from
super
there.
helpful. Yeah, I know. One of my assistants just made her own dress form. She was on a budget, and she just ordered. In fact, I'm going to send you the link because it just seemed like an amazing method. You answer this whole questionnaire about your shape and your size and your posture, and they send you a pattern for like $20 or something. You get a PDF of the pattern that they've customized for your exact shape. And so then she cut out the pattern and made the form and stuffed it and got a stand for it. And she's got a dress form that's her shape. So,
yeah, there are a bunch of methods. Yeah, we've talked about the
Yeah.
methods of using. I think on the Threads website, there's a duct tape and plaster
Yep.
tape and all different ways to make it. I mean,
Yep.
some of them are more complicated and you can't do it by yourself. But
Yeah.
I think Janine had a
Also,
question
I
about
mean,
draping. Yeah.
Yeah, Carolyn, is there a way that you can drape without having a dress form? I mean, there are home sewers out there who may not have one and may not be interested in or cannot invest in one. You just talked about making your own, but if they don't have one and they want to get started draping, is there a way to do that?
I would say you could do some methods of draping, like the idea of the first chapter, experimental draping, where you're draping fabrics, and you could pin it to a bulletin board and try and work with the fabric and see whether it's going to work better with gathers or darts or top stitching. So there's certain draping things, and you could try to shape a sleeve or. But I think. Well, the other thing you could do is you could drape it on a person, which is also what they do in high-end couture. They drape on a person. So if you had a friend that was willing to stand there for a while, you could certainly, have them hold out their arms and pin and drape on a person. It's also slightly harder, though, because when you're pinning on a dress form, of course, you can put the pins directly into the form to hold things in place. Whereas with a person, you may not
so
be able
much.
to do that. Not so much. But that would be another way of doing it. Now, see that wire thing that's behind you there, Janine? You could certainly also drape on something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a little display mannequin and work with fabric that way, work with your style that way. It's easy to make a stuffed arm if you wanted to do a sleeve.
We, in fact, have an article in Threads magazine about how to do a sleeve. We also have several on dress forms, but there is one specifically on making a sleeve by Kenneth D. King.
Yeah. Nice.
Oh, Carolyn, you have a chapter called Block to Drape Method, which looked like it was something that is a somewhere between starting with a sort of a sloper type of a piece and doing original draping. Is that something that you would recommend for someone who's an experienced sewer but maybe hasn't done a lot of draping?
Yes, I was thinking that chapter would really apply to your readers, because people are working with patterns and perhaps they want to customize it. Perhaps they want to size it up or down. Perhaps it's something complicated like a tailored jacket. So I have this picture here that's one of the chapter covers, and this is in the Block to Drape chapter. What I've done is teach the method where you would take a block. So in a fashion firm, you would have a well-fitting bodice, a well-fitting pant that's been fit and tried and worn and is comfortable. You would have a tailored jacket that has a balanced shoulder and a balanced 3 panels. So what I do in this exercise is I take that tailored jacket pattern, I trace it on, I put the grain lines on the muslin, and then I trace the main outlines of that tailored jacket onto the muslin. Then I put it onto the dress form, and I have those reference points. So I know that shoulder fits a certain way and goes with a certain pad, and I know that the 3 panels are balanced. But then I'm going to make it a little bit more fitted, and I'm going to make it longer and shorter, and I'm going to change the shape of the lapel and make the collar bigger. And so then you can work with it as you're going, but you have that block that you can rely on. So this is something also that's used a lot in the fashion industry as a time saver. So let's say something like pants or a sleeve, both of which have sort of a complex combination of curves with your armhole and your sleeve curve that have to fit together just right. And so perhaps I'm going to take my an armhole, and then I'm going to take a sleeve block pattern, and I'm going to copy it onto my muslin with leaving extra fabric around it. But I know that armhole, that is going to fit onto that sleeve. And then I can make it longer and bigger or shorter, make it a puff sleeve, or make an interesting tuck, or do some kind of improvisational pleating on it. But I can rely on the fact that I know that armhole is working and the sleeve is going to fit into that armhole. And it's the same thing with pants. Pants are very tricky to drape from scratch. Very tricky. So if you have a pant block that fits well, we use that as a starting point. So I trace it onto the muslin and I put it on my form and make it wider, or add pleats, or add pockets, or make a palazzo, width at the hem, and work with it in that way. So I recommend the book strictly, even just for that chapter. It's an amazing technique, and it's a technique that's used a lot in professional situations as a time-saving method and a way to ensure that your things are going to fit well.
I think it seems like such a great approach, because people who like to sew and want to make a very personal to them wardrobe may find a pattern that they think is sort of it's almost there but not all the way there, or maybe it's pretty far away from what they want. Only the bodice is good, everything else is not quite right. They have something to start with. They don't have to go completely from scratch. Exactly. And yet they're sort of building it to be what they want, which takes us back to what you said at the beginning. I've tried this by chopping up a pattern and spreading it, or overlapping it, or adding pleats on the table, and then putting it back together again and hoping it turns out to be what I want. And sometimes it works out pretty well, and sometimes it works out a little bit disappointingly. And it would be nice to have a way to just feel like you're getting there without having to go through all that type of trial and error.
Right. So if you have patterns that you've worked with, then perhaps you know that shoulder fits you really well, or the bust dart is in the right place, but you're going to change it into a tuck, or you're going to change it into gathers, or you're going to make it bigger or longer. But at least you have a starting point, which I think is a valuable, thing.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time, and I want to thank you so much, Carolyn, for spending some time with us. It's been really enjoyable to talk to you and learn about all the different things you do. It's really inspiring.
Great. Well, I also wanted to mention if any of your readers have suggestions of things they'd like to learn more about or look at the book and want more detail about certain things, I'm going to be starting like some Zoom classes and workshops out of my studio. So I'd love any kind of feedback or any, suggestions about what people want to learn more about.
Okay, well, we will include a link to your website in the show notes. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that both books come with a video component. Yes. So we did not talk about the first book. The basic course comes with a DVD, and the new book comes with QR codes that you can scan in with your phone, and it takes you to video tutorials. I have not done it yet, but I know that you can do that. So it's. I mean, if you want to bring Carolyn's methods to life after you've read the book, there are ways to do that too. So
great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Janine. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you for listening. Follow Threads on social media and visit threadsmagazine.com to view show notes for this episode. While you're on the site, check out Threads Insider, our online membership with exclusive access to expert sewing techniques. Until next time, keep on sewing with Threads.